My son texted, "I'd rather lose my mother than lose my wife." So I quietly removed his name from 800 acres, a $12 million estate, and every account he thought was already his. The wine hit me before I understood what had happened. Cold, sharp, the smell of it, a Pinot Noir I'd opened specifically because it was Jared's favorite, filled my nose as it ran down my face and soaked into the collar of my blouse. I stood there for a full second, completely still, hand still reaching for the napkin I hadn't gotten to yet, while my brain processed the sequence of events in the wrong order. Wet, then cold, then the sound of the glass, then Fiona's arm still extended from the throw, then my son's hand connected with my cheek, full palm, no hesitation. "Stop," Jared said. "You're ruining everything." I had baked cornbread that afternoon, roasted a chicken the way he'd liked since he was 10 years old, with lemon and rosemary and the skin pulled back to rub butter underneath. I had set out the good tablecloth, not because I was performing anything. I did those things because they were the language I'd spoken to my son for 31 years, and some part of me still believed that language could reach him, even now. Fiona was laughing behind me as I left the room. Jared didn't follow. I went to the bathroom off the hallway, pressed a washcloth to my face, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. The cheek was already showing color. The blouse was ruined. The cornbread was still warm in the kitchen. I thought, this is the moment, right here. This is the one you don't come back from. Then I dried my face, straightened my spine, and went to wait for whatever came next. What came next was a text message sent at 11:47 that night, after they'd driven away without another word to me. "I'd rather lose my mother than lose my wife." I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the nightstand, opened the drawer on the left side of my bed, the side that used to be Harold's, and pulled out the estate binder. 800 acres, the house, 3 trust accounts, 2 retirement funds, a commercial property in Charlottesville that Harold's father had bought in 1961 for $14,000 and was now worth considerably more. Jared's name was on nearly all of it. Beneficiary, joint holder, named heir in a will I'd drafted 22 months ago, in the first terrible fog of widowhood, when every decision felt like sinking, and I'd made the ones that felt most like staying afloat. None of the transfers had been filed with the county clerk yet. I held the binder in my lap for a while. The house was quiet. Outside, it had started to rain, the slow, persistent kind that doesn't announce itself, just settles in and stays. I was not angry. That's the thing I need you to understand, because everything that came after only makes sense if you understand this. I was not angry. Anger is heat. Anger is reactive. What I felt sitting on the edge of that bed at midnight, with wine still faintly in my hair, and the mark of my son's hand fading on my cheek, was something else entirely. It was clarity. Cold, clean, the kind that only comes after everything else burns away. I closed the binder, set my alarm for 6:30, turned off the light. In the morning, I would call my attorney. "My name is Margaret Cecile Winslow. I am 64 years old. I was married to Harold Douglas Winslow for 38 years until his death from pancreatic cancer 14 months ago. And in that time, we built something on this land that I do not use the word legacy lightly to describe. Harold and I met in 1983 at the Virginia Military Institute's spring formal. I was a guest, he was a cadet, and he asked me to dance with the particular combination of formality and nervousness that I would spend the next 4 decades finding endearing. We married in 1985. Harold went to active duty. I finished my nursing degree and followed him to 3 duty stations in 7 years before we came back to Albemarle County and took over his family's farm, which at the time was 340 acres of mostly overgrown pasture and a farmhouse that needed more work than we had money for. We built it. That's the plain version. We built it the way people build things when they don't have any other option. Slowly, carefully, through decisions made at kitchen tables at 9 p.m., after the baby was down and the chores were done, with legal pads and calculators and a particular kind of stubborn faith that the work would eventually mean something. It did. It meant 800 acres, a fully operational farm, a house that Harold spent 6 years restoring by hand, and a combined estate that my attorney, Richard Calloway, 31 years in estate law, Virginia Bar Association Member of the Year 2019, had recently valued at approximately $12.4 million. Harold left it to me absolutely. No conditions, no trustees, no oversight. He trusted me the way he'd trusted me for 38 years, completely, without qualification. And I had intended to honor that trust by eventually passing the estate to our only child. I had intended to. Then Jared married Fiona. I want to be fair about Fiona, because this story is going to make that difficult, and I think fairness is important. Fiona Marchetti Winslow is 34 years old. She has a master's degree in communications from Georgetown, excellent taste in clothing, and a particular skill for entering rooms in a way that makes everyone immediately aware she has entered. She is not unintelligent. She is not, as far as I know, a genuinely bad person in the abstract sense. She is, however, the specific kind of person who relates to other people primarily through what they can offer her, and who, when she senses a resource, treats the surrounding human relationships as administrative obstacles to be managed until they are no longer necessary. The early signs were small, the kind you rationalize because you want to, because the alternative is accepting that your son's choice of partner is going to cost you something. She never learned Harold's middle name, even after the wedding. When he was dying, she visited the hospital twice in 6 weeks, both times dressed as though she were going somewhere else afterward. At the funeral, she spent a significant portion of the reception talking to Harold's business contacts talks about Jared's career trajectory, which she had recently decided should move from agricultural management, what he'd trained for, what he was good at, what the land needed, into finance. Jared, for his part, had adored his father and was devastated by the loss in a way he expressed primarily through silence and compliance. He stopped pushing back on things that required pushing. He stopped making decisions that Fiona disagreed with. He stopped calling me as often. When he did call, there was a quality to his voice that took me 4 months to identify correctly. He sounded managed. I told myself it was grief. I told myself they were figuring out their marriage under terrible circumstances and that the friction was situational. I told myself that my son, who I had raised to be honest and kind and to understand that the land demanded respect, was still in there underneath whatever was happening. I told myself a lot of things. The first real crack appeared 8 months after Harold died, at a meeting with Richard Calloway about the estate transfer documents. Fiona came to that meeting uninvited. I hadn't known she was coming. Jared said she was in the area and might stop by, which was the kind of half sentence that doesn't give you enough information to object. She sat at the conference table in Richard's office and asked questions about timeline and liquidity with the specific fluency of someone who had done homework. She knew which accounts were most accessible. She knew the commercial property's approximate value. She knew the terms of the trust structures better than Jared did. Richard caught my eye across the table once, briefly, with an expression he immediately neutralized. I signed nothing that day. I told Richard I needed more time. On the drive home, Jared was quiet. Then, she just wants to understand what we're working with. I didn't say what I was thinking. Instead, I asked him when he'd told her the account details. He said they didn't have secrets. I nodded. I looked out the window at the Blue Ridge in November, brown and gray and still, and I thought about Harold, who had worked that land for 30 years, and whose hands I had held at the end while his body made its final accounting. And I thought, not yet. Not until I understand what I'm actually doing. I went home and called my therapist. Dr. Patricia Howe has been my therapist for 9 years. She's a licensed clinical social worker with a private practice in Charlottesville, and she is one of the most precisely perceptive people I have ever encountered. I described the meeting. I described Fiona's questions. I described the quality of Jared's silence on the drive home. She asked, "What does your body tell you?" My hands had been cold since the meeting. The specific cold that lives in your palms when your nervous system is trying to tell you something your conscious mind is still negotiating with. That something is wrong, I said. Then start there, she said. I started there. Over the next 6 months, I kept notes. Not a journal. I'm not a journal person. Just a running document on my laptop, date stamped, recording the specifics of incidents that felt significant. Fiona suggesting that the farmland might generate more revenue if it were partially developed. Fiona mentioning, twice, a financial advisor she thought I should meet with, a person who turned out, when I looked him up, to have 3 FINRA disciplinary disclosures on his record. Jared telling me, in February, that they'd started looking at a property in McLean, a house significantly beyond what his farm management salary could support, and describing it with the confident language of someone who considered their financial future already settled. The farmland, the trust accounts, the retirement funds, the commercial property in Charlottesville. His name wasn't on them yet, but in his head, they were already his. I brought a folder of these notes to Richard Calloway in March. I didn't tell him about my suspicions in elaborate terms. I just laid out the timeline and the pattern and asked him what my legal exposure was, if I transferred assets now and later had reason to believe the transferee was acting in bad faith. Richard is not a man who alarms easily. He looked at the folder for a long time. "Have you signed anything since Harold's death?" he asked. "Nothing's been filed," I said. He sat back. "Then everything is still yours, Margaret. Every signature on those transfer documents is yours. Nothing is legally binding until it's recorded with the county." I let that land. "I need to understand my options," I said. "You have all of them," he said. "Right now, today, you have every option." I went home and made dinner. I did not feel relieved. I felt the particular focused calm of someone who has just confirmed that the window they need is still open, and who is now deciding deliberately whether to climb through it. I didn't decide anything that night or the next week. I did what I've always done when I'm working through something that matters. I went about my life. I took care of the land. I had Richard's paralegal, a young woman named Dana Peretti, who I'd gotten to know over the preceding months, prepare a full inventory of every asset in the estate with current valuations. I updated my own records. I met with my accountant, Gordon Bell, 40 years in private practice, specializing in agricultural estate tax, the kind of man who has seen everything and judges nothing. I walked him through Harold's original estate structure and asked him to model several alternative scenarios. He asked me, professionally and without editorial comment, whether I was considering a change in beneficiary structure. "I'm considering my options," I said. "Then you should know," he said, "that the current structure could be entirely unwound within a 72-hour execution window if that became necessary." "Good to know," I said. It was good to know. I still hadn't made a decision when I planned the dinner. In retrospect, I think part of me needed to see it one more time. Not because I hadn't already seen enough, but because the action I was considering was irreversible and significant, and I needed to know that I was making it from evidence, not from wound. I baked the cornbread, roasted the chicken, set out the butter, and then Fiona threw the wine glass in my face, and my son's hand connected with my cheek, and he told me to stop ruining everything, and I left the room with the smell of Pinot Noir in my hair. And that night, at 11:47 p.m., the text arrived. "I'd rather lose my mother than lose my wife. Decision made. Richard Calloway's office. The next morning, 10:02 a.m. I had brought the estate binder, my personal notes document printed and dated, and a photograph I had taken in the bathroom the night before. The mark on my cheek, documented, time-stamped, 11:09 p.m. My iPhone 14 automatically saves location and timestamp data in the file. I had not planned to need that photograph. I took it anyway, because I'm a woman who spent 38 years married to a military man, and certain habits are now structural. Richard looked at the binder. He looked at the photograph. He looked at me. How do you want to handle this? He asked. Completely, I said. I want it done before end of business today. He didn't try to slow me down or suggest I take more time to consider. That's one of the reasons I have worked with Richard Calloway for 19 years. He has a particular quality of professional respect, the kind that means he does not treat his clients as people who need to be protected from their own decisions. I'll have a notary to your house by 5:30, he said. She arrived at 5:47. Lydia Carmichael, commissioned notary, who had done estate work with Richard's firm for 11 years and who arrived in a gray cardigan with a briefcase and the business-like efficiency of someone who had presided over significant paperwork on difficult days before. She laid the documents on my dining room table, the same table where the wine glass had been thrown less than 24 hours earlier. I had cleaned it that morning. The tablecloth was in the wash. I signed every page. The retirement fund beneficiary designations, the trust amendment, the property title transfer revocation, the revised will, which Richard had redrafted in 4 hours with a new primary beneficiary structure, the Winslow Foundation, a charitable entity he'd established simultaneously, named in Harold's memory, with a $10 million initial endowment earmarked for veterans services and women in crisis. Harold had been military. He would have approved. I signed every line without hesitating. Lydia notarized, organized, and was out the door in 23 minutes. I went to the fireplace. I burned the old transfer documents. I stood and watched Jared's name curl and disappear in the flame, and I felt something I can only describe accurately as removal. Not revenge, not satisfaction. The particular sensation of excising something from a wound so it can start to close. Then I called the Charlottesville Daily Progress and spoke to their community editor about announcing the Winslow Foundation and its inaugural $10 million donation. The article ran Saturday morning. They saw it by 9 a.m. I know this because by 9:14, Jared had texted. Not called, texted, which told me he was in a conversation that Fiona could monitor. The text said, "We need to talk about the article. Can we come by tonight?" I waited 4 hours before responding. 6 o'clock, I wrote back. I spent that Saturday afternoon doing things that needed doing. I had a fence line on the east pasture that wanted attention. I did 2 loads of laundry. I made a pot of vegetable soup, a large one, because it keeps well and because I find chopping vegetables meditative in the way other people find yoga meditative. I also called my neighbor Ella Birdsong, who lives a quarter-mile down the road and who has been my friend for 22 years. I told Ella what had happened at dinner, the glass, the slap, the text. I told her what I'd done with the estate documents. Ella is 67, recently retired from a career in social work that included 20 years with Virginia's Adult Protective Services. She has seen things in the course of her professional life that have given her an extremely finely calibrated sense of when a situation is about to escalate. "I'm going to be outside at 6, she said. "Don't argue with me." I didn't argue. Fiona arrived first. Jared's car was 30 seconds behind. The heels clicked on my porch steps. The pale green coat was immaculate. She came through the door with the particular energy of someone who had spent the drive composing their approach and was now executing it. Warm, complimentary, leaning into a performance of admiration for the foundation announcement. "It's so inspiring," she said. "Harold would have been so proud." She said Harold's name with the specific carelessness of someone who has never thought carefully about a person in their life. I poured her a glass of water. I did not offer wine. Jared sat down across from me. He looked like he hadn't slept. There was something around his eyes that might have been guilt, though I've learned not to trust my own interpretation of his expressions when Fiona is in the room, because her presence changes which version of himself he's running. The pivot came at 6:22. Fiona leaned forward, elbows on my table, and began explaining how the Winslow Foundation could be restructured for maximum efficiency. How Jared's skill set, she listed it as though I hadn't watched my son develop that skill set over 30 years, made him a natural fit to co-manage it. How keeping everything in the family would protect Harold's legacy. She used Harold's name 4 times in that speech. I let her finish. Then I stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, came back, and sat down. "No," I said. "It's done." The smile didn't break immediately. It cracked. A hairline fracture, barely visible, the kind you notice only if you've been watching the surface carefully. Jared tried next. He said he felt excluded. He said this was his family legacy too. He said he hadn't realized I was this upset about dinner. Dinner. The word he used for what happened. I took a sip of water. "I'm not upset," I said. And I wasn't. That was the honest truth. I was the calmest I had been in 14 months. That's when Fiona's register shifted. She said I had embarrassed them. She said I was being vindictive. She said people would talk. Their people, presumably, the Charlottesville social network she had spent 4 years trying to access through association with the Winslow name. Then she stood up too fast. The chair screeched back across my kitchen floor. She grabbed the soup bowl. I saw it happening, the way you sometimes see things in the moment before impact. Clearly, slowly, with a kind of disassociated precision. She grabbed the bowl of vegetable soup I'd spent the afternoon soon making, and she flung it. The broth hit my chest, hot enough that I pulled back. Carrots on my floor, the bowl rattling against the baseboard. She was already screaming about betrayal, her word, her betrayal, while the soup ran down the front of my blouse. She said I had stolen from their future. She said Harold would have wanted this handled differently. She said I was a jealous woman who couldn't stand to see her son happy. Jared grabbed my arm, not Fiona's arm, mine. He grabbed my arm and told me to apologize. That's when the front door opened. Ella Birdsong is a compact woman with close-cropped silver hair and the particular stillness of someone who has spent 20 years professionally assessing dangerous situations. She stepped into my kitchen with her phone raised and the camera already running. She'd been on the porch since 5:55. She'd heard the chair screech. She'd heard Fiona's voice hit the register it had just hit. She'd hit record the moment she came through the door, and the footage she captured was 12 minutes and 44 seconds of unambiguous, unedited reality. Fiona screaming, the soup still steaming on my floor, Jared's hand on my arm, my face, my soaked blouse, my absolute stillness. Fiona froze. The silence was immediate and total. Jared released my arm and stepped back. Ella, I said, please call the police. She dialed 911 right there. Speaker on. The dispatcher's voice filled the kitchen. Officers arrived in 11 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock when I heard the tires on the gravel. 6:51 p.m. 2 units. The responding officers were Deputy Calvin Marsh, 4 years with the Albemarle County Sheriff's Department, and Deputy Renata Osei, 7 years, who I learned later had a secondary assignment in domestic incident response. Statements were taken in separate rooms. Ella's video was reviewed on scene and formally requested as evidence. Deputy Osei photographed my arm. The bruising from Jared's grip was already visible, and my chest, where the soup had left a reddened area that her incident report would describe as a thermal contact mark. She documented the bowl, the soup on the floor, the chair position. She was professional. She was thorough. She did not offer me sympathy or tell me she was sorry, and I respected that enormously, because what I needed in that moment was not sympathy. I needed documentation. They left in separate squad cars. Fiona went first. She was silent by then. The screaming version of herself had encountered the presence of law enforcement and collapsed back into something quieter and more frightened. Jared went second. He looked at me once through the squad car window as it pulled away, and I cannot tell you with confidence what his expression was. I locked the front door, cleaned the soup off the floor, changed my blouse. Then I called Richard Calloway's emergency line. It was 8:14 p.m. I left one sentence. The restriction protocols are active. Execute immediately. Richard had drawn up the restriction protocols 6 weeks earlier, at a meeting I'd requested specifically for the purpose of contingency planning. He had described them, mildly, as asset protection provisions in the event of an adverse interpersonal development. We had never directly stated what adverse development we were planning for. We hadn't needed to. By 7 the next morning, the provisions were active. Jared's financial power of attorney, which I had granted 14 months ago in the fog of grief, was formally revoked. The 2 accounts where he'd been added as a convenience co-holder during Harold's illness were flagged, and access suspended pending legal review. The estate's primary trust account had a legal hold notation filed with our institution's compliance department, citing an active dispute review under Virginia Code, paragraph 642779. Gordon Bell had the foundation account structured and separated by 9:30 a.m. The $10 million endowment was formally in escrow with an independent trustee, Dr. Anita Forsyth, a nonprofit governance attorney with 26 years in charitable trust administration, who Richard had recommended and I had vetted personally. By noon, I was at the Albemarle County Courthouse in the navy blazer I had worn to Harold's military commendation hearing in 2019, the one I keep for days that require a particular kind of presence. I filed for an emergency protective order, physical and financial provisions. The petition cited the incidents on Thursday evening and Sunday evening, Ella's video documentation, the photographs taken by Deputy Osei, and a sworn statement from Richard Calloway attesting to the financial intimidation pattern he had observed in the months preceding. The Honorable District Court Judge Frances Alcott, 23 years on the bench, the kind of judge who reads every page before her, reviewed the petition the same afternoon. Emergency provisions were granted at 3:47 p.m., 100 feet. No contact, no property approach, no financial claims against the estate for 6 months, pending a full civil hearing. I drove home. I made dinner, real dinner, the rest of the vegetable soup base from yesterday, reconstituted with new vegetables because I don't waste food. At 7:22 p.m., Jared's car appeared at my gate. He sat there for perhaps 90 seconds. The new security system I'd had installed 3 weeks earlier, a Ring Pro networked camera array covering all access points because Richard had suggested it and I'd had no reason to say no, registered the vehicle, matched the plate, and auto-alerted the Albemarle County Sheriff's Department based on the active protective order. A patrol car turned into my drive at 7:29. Jared left without a word. I watched from the kitchen window. Then I went back to the stove and finished chopping carrots. 6 months later, the civil hearing produced outcomes I won't detail completely, both because they involve ongoing legal proceedings and because, frankly, some of them are not mine to characterize publicly. What I will say is that the financial power of attorney revocation was upheld. The estate structure, the foundation, the revised trust, the new beneficiary designations, was found legally sound and properly executed. Gordon Bell's documentation and Richard's timeline were, as Richard had had predicted, very difficult to argue against. Jared retained his own attorney. He filed a counter petition in the civil matter. It was denied. Fiona, based on what I have been told through appropriate legal channels, retained a divorce attorney approximately 6 weeks after the hearing. I don't know the current status of their marriage, and I genuinely do not think about it often. What I think about is the land. I walk it most mornings. 800 acres takes a while, even in sections. Harold and I used to do it together. Not the whole thing, but pieces. In the habit of people who have owned something long enough that walking it is less inspection than conversation. You learn what the land is telling you if you pay attention. You learn when something is wrong and when it's right and when it simply needs time. The foundation had its first grant cycle in April. 63 applications reviewed by a 5-member board I selected with Dr. Forsyth's guidance. 22 grants awarded, 12 to veterans organizations, 10 to programs serving women in crisis situations. The kind of situations where someone needed documentation and a locked gate, and a neighbor who showed up with her phone already recording. Dr. Forsyth runs the process with the same precision she brings to everything. She calls me after each board meeting with a summary. We have lunch occasionally. She is one of the best decisions I have made in the last 2 years. Patricia Howe asked me at our session in May how I was sitting with everything. Well, I said, and meant it. She asked if I had processed the grief of it. Not the estate, not the legal proceedings, but my son, the relationship, the particular loss of what you believed something was. I thought about it for a while. I think, I said, that I grieved Jared before this happened. I started grieving him the day I noticed the quality of his voice on the phone had changed. She nodded. She wrote something down. The legal process, she said, didn't take something from you. You exercised agency in a situation where your instinct was to be passive. That's the right word for it, agency. Harold left me everything absolutely. No trustees, no conditions, no oversight. He trusted me with 38 years of shared work because he knew I would be a faithful steward of it. I have tried to be exactly that. The gate is locked now. The cameras cover every access point. The trust is administered by someone who has earned that responsibility. And on Sunday mornings, when the light comes through the east pasture the way it does in September, low and golden, the kind of light that makes everything look like it's been worth it, I walk out onto the porch with my coffee, and I look at what Harold and I built, and I think about how little I am willing to let happen to it. Not much. That's the answer. Not very much at all.